afternoon or good evening, depending on when you're watching this this set of interviews. I'm Peter Stanton, the publisher of the Worcester Business Journal, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to a conversation with Worcester Business Journal's 2020 Hall of Fame inductees to our business leader group. And the theme of our conversation is leading through crisis and change. That might not have been our theme a year ago, but given the events of the last several months, I think that's where we all kind of find ourselves. This is a conversation we're having here today with the Hall of Fame inductees, and there's a separate panel conversation we've had with our business leaders of the year in the various categories of large and small and nonprofit. So we were able to pull off this special event with a lot of moving parts, thanks to the support of our sponsors. And those sponsors for the Business Leader event are Country Bank and Harvard Pilgrim Healthcare. And we'd like to thank them for their standing behind not just this event, but our efforts to support leadership and ethics and the effort in sharing the wisdom of all of our winners with our audience in Central Massachusetts. So a special thank you to Country Bank and to Harvard Pilgrim Healthcare for their support. I'm gonna just say I'm gonna have each of the panelists say a quick hello when I introduce them, and then we'll dig into some questions. I'd like to introduce first Linda Cavioli, who is the executive director of the YWCA of Central Massachusetts. Hey, Linda.
Hi, hi, Peter.
Nice logo there behind you. We're never going to confuse who you are on this webcast.
Absolutely not.
Yeah, Karen Kohler is the president and CEO of RCAP Solutions, Inc. Karen, nice to have you with us.
Hi, Peter. Good to see everybody again. I wanted to let you know I brought my props. So I'm not quite as clever as Linda, but I've got my RCAP mug and my RCAP resilience hat on that I'll talk about in a few minutes.
Love to have a little bling on the show with us. That's great.
There you go. You can always count on me.
And third, I'd like to welcome Scott Richardson, who is the president of Gorman Richardson Lewis Architects. Scott, nice to have you with us.
Hi, Peter, Karen, and Linda. Great to be here. Thank you for this recognition.
So we want to begin our conversation really talking about the time that we're living in, which is really going to go down in the history books, I think, as an incredible period. Both first because of the pandemic that kind of arrived on our shores in February or March, and has had a big effect on all of our organizations. And then of late, we've had just a moment of, I think, Linda, you called it the second pandemic, which is which feels like a real significant coming to terms with racial equality in our country. And those may or may not layer on to your business, but they're certainly really important events. And so I want to kind of talk about both of them as we get started, and then later on talk about leadership and mentorship and and how you make sure your team, develop a team that can, carry on, even if our Hall of Famers someday actually retire, God forbid the thought. So we're coming out of this economic shutdown from the coronavirus. What has changed in your organization, your approach to work in the last 90 days, and how long are those changes going to be in place, do you see? And maybe, Scott, if you want to just tell us first, what's been the effect on your business?
Sure, I can get started. Thanks, Peter. So interestingly, we never really shut down because fortunately in our business, we had the luxury of being able to do our design work pretty much from anywhere. What it did impact was obviously our meetings with our clients or meetings internally all moved to virtual meetings. So we had really been set up to work remotely to begin with. So many of our projects had virtual access for meetings because not everybody could make every meeting anyway. So again, that second week in March, everything just went to, okay, no, don't drive to get here for a meeting, just go virtual. And again, our staff has really stepped up to the plate in working very effectively from home.
Okay. And Karen, what about your organization? How much can be done in that virtual way, and how much is really needs to be face to face on the ground?
Yeah, well, we have learned a tremendous amount. The beauty of having moved late last year, we moved to May Street, which allowed us a huge more capacity for staff and for social distancing, which we never could have handled even a year ago at our older location. So we've been blessed to have a much larger building, wonderful parking area. And so we've been able to manage that quite nicely. Our organization, as you know, we've got a component within the Worcester County area, but then we have a much larger component that is the Northeast RCAP and the footprint that brings us all the way down to the Caribbean. So it's a very different kind of workforce. That workforce was always independent. Most of them worked out of their homes. They still do. We don't have storefront offices in Puerto Rico, as an example. And so I would say 60% of our workforce plus administration were very used to working independently and at home and using technology. The people in Worcester directly were the ones that needed a little bit of assistance. The beauty, again, of the move was that we had already updated all of our servers. We had already started issuing tablets to a lot of our staff so that they did not have to be as clumsy with as much paper. So in terms of the staff, we really ramped up very quickly. We ended up closing completely. We are considered an essential service by the state of Massachusetts, or the Commonwealth. So we had to service all of our clients upon need, housing issues, rent arrearages, just a whole plethora of issues that not just do we handle during this pandemic, but we handled it all the time for individuals of low income and also working to keep them home and not become homeless. So we rolled through it. I think for the clients, I can't say enough about all of the different organizations that support our clients and have helped a client or a family to figure out how to access through websites and through, doing more electronic paperwork. We now have moved to fillable forms and just a whole bunch of stuff that way. But our referral mechanism, of which the YWCA is one, but everyone, all the nonprofits, all the people that work so diligently with our clients, they're the ones that I really applaud. This has got to be one of the hardest things that our clientele has ever had to go through, and I don't think it's over.
And so you point out a real interesting thing, which is it's one thing for the organization to put technology in the hands of your employees, but do your clients have that same, access and toolkit and ability to interface that way? And it's so easy to take for granted, and Linda's shaking her head.
Yeah, I can see
the
Linda.
answer is no. So, both of you, I think, have, and Linda, to switch to you, on the surface, YWCA, fitness, a few other services, but you're in a whole number of businesses, right? When you really break it down. So how do you sort of address that sort of pandemic influence on your organization?
Well, for the YWCA, we didn't have the platform to work from home. Most of our business, childcare, domestic violence, housing, emergency shelter is face-to-face. It's seeing and seeing people's faces and body language to be able to work through and, maneuvering languages. So we were moving, frankly, our domestic violence first moved virtually because they couldn't interrupt. We're 24/7 operation. So that became one of getting the technology into people's hands and getting our participants to understand how we could help them, because we have had to go to court. We have to be at the police station to be able to service the most immediate high-risk clients. And then childcare, we closed to the public our regular families, 300 families on a Monday, and Tuesday morning in a consortium with UMass, healthcare providers, first responders. We reopened as an emergency childcare. So didn't miss a step, just added more safety and regulations. And our staff were dealing with high-risk clients, understanding how to prevent our staff and the children and families we served who were on the front lines of the pandemic. But put all that together, and then the work that the YWCA has been doing for 150 years of eliminating racism and empowering women, and you can't do one without the other. In fact, you can't even empower women without eliminating racism. In our community and our country, we first saw the disparity in the disease. We saw that maybe in the white community, it's our white hairs, and the three of us on this screen are white hairs. We're at most risk. But in the communities of color, they're the frontline workers. They're the aides in the police and fire and EMTs and home health aides. They're the ones, grocery workers, warehouse workers. They're the ones who have those frontline jobs, not just the doctors and nurses. So what we saw was those communities, it was hitting their younger folk. It was really not helping families if someone got sick, be able to manage their families. I mean, within 72 hours, I mean, the city was amazing in setting up emergency shelters. But what we found was co-ed shelters for women in trauma did not work. So within 72 hours, our community responded with the city and the agencies to open a women's shelter to deal with our highest risks, sexually exploited, violence, so that we could, in fact, be a subgroup to respond to all of those things. And with the support of the city and other agencies, partnerships that we're all a part of in the nonprofit sector, we learned a lot. We need to be technologically more savvy, which we are not. But look at me, I have a background. I never even did a Zoom meeting before this. But now I have to lead an organization as a high-risk individual with a disabled husband from my dining room. So I have to rely on my leaders, my team, to help with a day-to-day operation 24/7.
Wow.
Sorry.
Yeah, it just shows you the impact. So when you, in your daycare count, did you have, X number of kids out the door one day and then a different set of kids literally in 48 hours later? How many in the
Absolutely.
program roughly?
Today, we operate with about 40 to 50 emergency on site, but we're still supporting our 300 families. We want them to come back. Yes, the state is subsidizing our vouchers and income eligible slots, but we're not receiving any income from our privates. We're servicing them. Some of them are making contributions, but our income impact is about $150,000 a month.
So Linda, let's start with you on the it's fascinating when you read about the YWCA mission and Linda's work tying in race. This whole award was written up, and this mission has been in place well before George Floyd's the current events, right? So this has been an ongoing priority. How is that? Let's call it a current raising of consciousness, and we're looking for substantial change to come from it. How do you see that rolling out inside your organization? What has it meant to you, your employees, the people you serve?
Well, as difficult as it is for us, we're cheering from our rooftop because the YWCA has been working with grassroots communities of color since our inception. In fact, I mean, we've had branches to deal with target populations since the 1800s. So for us, it means that we have so many more voices and hand-to-hand joining us in our work. I mean, we defer to those communities that have faced it every day. And we try to lead when they ask us, walk side by side when they ask us, and lead from behind. But we were one of the first ones out with a very bold statement. We were asked by the Worcester Together to help fashion a statement for our community. We work with the police every day in domestic violence. So we have to understand their role, but how that just does not work if we're not understanding that all communities need to be protected. So for us, shining the spotlight on the disparities of this disease and the disparities of access and equal care, and the word we use is inclusion, diversity, and equity, because equity really, equality is different when you start from a different starting line. So it's all about equity. How do you bring all those to the same starting line? And so now we're an ally, and we have more allies. When the business community spoke out in your article that resources need to be put to this work has been done with no financial resources, and it needs to be financially supported. It's as important as childcare and domestic violence and housing work that we all do.
Mhm. Got it. Karen, how about your organization? How is this sort of raising consciousness about sort of racial inequality kind of filtered through your clients, employees?
Mhm. So again, it's interesting because the work we do out in rural America, which is primarily the Northeast footprint that I mentioned earlier, is quite an interesting amount of work. And we work with all types of people of color, race, poverty, very, very rural poverty. So it's a continuation of what we believe is the reason we're in business. And the national, I mean, we certainly have not been in business as long as the YWCA. We just celebrate our 50th year. But the work that we do in rural America is being highlighted in addition to the economic problems. So this is going to be a really good time for rural America to rebuild and reshape their futures. And I think that when you lap over that and the incidences that have happened in the last, few weeks, it can only be better. You mentioned that, we've done studies now. We're talking about enhanced training with our staff because, you do, as Linda said, when you are dealing with so many people who are so troubled on a regular basis, we have to also make sure our staff remain healthy. So we have been starting dialogue in terms of retraining and building more of a sophisticated understanding of the issues. And also starting to, we have an EAP program, Employee Assistance Program, which allows staff to reach out and have counseling. One of the toughest things is when you have a staff person that's undergoing as much of the stress as the person across the table from them, and they're trying to stay balanced and do their job. So it's, to me, it's more of a multifaceted problem. It's just not fix the issues of color or fix the issues of economics. I think this is going to allow, if I can say, the country to reshape. And I hope that the future leaders, which is what it talks about with this award, but the future leaders are going to be very different than
Hopefully.
hopefully. I hope, and I mean, that's my goal,
Yeah.
but we'll talk about that in a few minutes. But you don't need the white faces anymore. What you need is a capacity to assist people to move into roles and be given what I believe is one of the strongest things about leadership is be given the opportunity to learn and to make mistakes, which I think is one of the toughest things that we can do. But I don't want to answer all my questions beforehand.
Yeah. That's good. Hey, so Scott, so you're working with a lot of corporate clients, but you're also doing a lot of nonprofit work, right? So, I mean, how does this issue sort of, how do you see it?
How does it tie into
Yeah,
potentially what we're doing or what we're feeling? Well, again, social justice issues have been on my mind for a very long time. We've been supporters of the Equal Justice Initiative, Brian Stevenson's organization out of Montgomery. And I had the opportunity to attend the opening of the museum and the memorial 2 years ago, and certainly support their work, which really focuses on criminal justice reform primarily, but also it all ties into the systemic racism that is still prevalent in this country. George Floyd's death certainly has been an incredible catalyst for motivating people of all ages, all races, across all, everything we see, see the protests, that everybody is now fed up with where we are, and everybody that is participating peacefully and making the right statements realizes we have still so much work to do to make this country what it was supposed to be 250 years ago, with justice and freedom and equality for all people. So we, as you have mentioned, we've worked with nonprofits really from the start of our, when we started, 44 years ago, providing design of housing, affordable housing, special needs housing, and we continue that work today. We also implemented what we called our 40 for 40 program 4 years ago, when we were celebrating our 40th anniversary, where we were committing to do pro bono work for any type of nonprofit that needed our help. And I think we're up to about 36 organizations that we've helped over the past 4 years. They could be as simple as some ADA accessibility studies, or just some consulting work that they would not have been able to do otherwise. So this has also opened up a weekly dialogue here at our office about these very issues. So every Thursday evening, we have what I've dubbed anything but Miller time, where we have a Teams meeting, and we're basically talking about these issues and what we are trying to put forward as far as our message, and how we can all work together to implement what this country really should be standing for.
Great. So I know I had a question written down related to leadership, but I want to kind of stick with the current pandemic and some of the pressures that creates. And so I guess Linda, you said, I'm sitting here, managing this massively moving multi-part, ship from my living room. And so that creates, I've said to folks, I feel like I'm working 8 days a week, even though
24/7.
And so it's one thing when you're in charge, you just kind of take it on. But what about your workforce? And so, actually, it's a two-part question. How do you find some balance in that space yourself? Because it's just, maybe you don't. Or maybe if you don't have any balance, how are you helping your team who maybe feels some intense pressures to kind of find that right space? We've been on some other webinars where we've talked about mental health being really another hidden issue in this country, where it would just under support the need for that. And I think that this pandemic puts a lot of pressure on folks who have just got a lot to manage. So how are you managing that yourself, or how are you helping your team find that balance? Linda, you want to?
Sure. Well, I'm not managing it very well for myself, because I'm in my 45th year of my career, and I'm a face-to-face social person, and my staff kicked me out of the building on March 17th, and they said they don't want to see me till September because of my age, and my husband, John, my partner, is disabled and very high risk. So I'm not doing a very good job. The blessing of my life is that I have grandchildren living with me, and my great grandchild comes to visit and brings a smile to John's face, and that breaks up the 24/7, because it literally is a 24/7 day. There's no boundaries, and I've never been good at boundaries. So, but what it's allowed is, I will be in a transition over the next year. And I've had I've always been, surround yourself with good people smarter than you, and it makes you look good, but you got to stop making them look good. So, the senior team is regularly meeting, but then we're only a phone call away. I I say that if I can't eliminate racism and empower women within my own organization, that logo can't be on my building, on my stationery. So our team, our senior team, our supervisory team, our board, our staff, we're between 40 and 50%, both from the front line to the leaders of our organization, representation of faces in communities of color. So if I can't walk the talk, then I better, shut down the organization. And I definitely have done a better job of empowering women. So my staff, who we've deployed to many tables, they just put the YWCA, oh yeah, we'll take that on. My associate executive director called and said, I hope you don't mind, but I took on co-leading setting up this women's shelter. I said, great, that's fine. And then, my race and gender equity director said, I hope you don't mind, but I wrote an email to the mayor and city manager that we need to have this side by side, this pandemic. And then I got put on the committee and I'm part of the co-chairing. I said, sounds good to me. So, I think that if that's the environment you create, where people who are representing you in the organization, they have to have the authority to be able to step forward and take and represent the organization. So that's never been a problem for me. And I've had to, over the years, have many representatives of the YWCA versus when I started. So that's great. So they know I'm a phone call away. They know if they make a mistake, oh well, that's that. I've made hundreds of them in my life, and that's how I've learned. So that kind of access and support and is really, that's my style, lead by a group. And it's harder for me than it is for the organization. So my issue is I have to figure out how to embrace this new life, and then ease my way back into, you understand that while I'm sitting here, I'm trying to raise the last $2 million of a capital campaign. The building is literally.
Well, pitch. Go ahead.
Well, we're literally in the middle. We kicked off our renovation January. It's done by December. The building is under total renovation while operating. So this is the hardest thing I've ever had to do. With
One thing I just wanted to add to that, which again, I'm sure Linda and Karen will agree with, is that your people, you hire the right people and they will always surprise and impress you with their commitment to what they're doing, especially during times like this. And kudos to your team, Linda, for that. Must feel so good when you get that feedback saying, oh, I went ahead and did this. And you're saying, yeah, that's the right thing to do. So.
Yeah, go ahead.
Do you want to talk about your balance or lack there?
Well, I was going to say ditto to everything Linda said, except I've got a couple of other twists and turns. First of all, I had personally, I had a dress rehearsal at this 2 years ago when I found out I had cancer. So that put the first spin into working at home, going through chemo, empowering my new leadership team, which we had just really started working on offloading some of the day-to-day and making sure that they were empowered to make good decisions and that I got out of their way and allowed them to do what they wanted to do. And I learned, that I couldn't do everything when I had cancer. So I feel very blessed that I had the dress rehearsal, as I call it, and now I was ready, ramped up and ready to go. All my equipment was already in my house. Everybody knows how to get here and drop paperwork off when I have to sign a contract. So it's kind of like business as usual, but it's so different for me. Yeah.
It's interesting. I think both of you in your story had mentioned, it's not, I got to make sure this isn't the Linda show or the Karen show, right? Which is, your central personalities to your organizations. You're the go-to person. And yet, Karen, you especially with that, you said, wait a minute, but this is a dry run on what does it look like to transition, and to not be in that kind of everything's going through me.
I will simply add that, and I don't know if Linda and I have not talked about this precisely, but if I wasn't working now, I probably would have gone out of my mind. And so, it's a matter of, I was blessed that I lived through the cancer and became cancer free. And if I had not, and had not been able to retain, my board has been fabulous. There's just no way to say anything else. But they stepped up, they allowed me to continue to do whatever I could do, and to, delegate as much as I could be, and we didn't miss a beat. And so it's kind of funny, I feel like I'm knocking on the back door sometimes saying, hey guys, do you remember me? I'm still CEO.
Don't worry, everybody knows who you are. But so you mentioned kind of the word silver lining, and that was one of my questions. And so some of that came from sort of your cancer as a trial run. Silver linings of this pandemic, I think, Scott, you mentioned kind of the team stepping up. Anything else that sort of comes out of this complete shift that just says, whoa, that's a change that might be sustainable and make us stronger?
Are you asking Scott?
Yeah.
No, oh, sorry.
Anybody, yeah. We can start with Scott.
Well, again, I think there will be the continued, while some people have returned to work here, but very few have. And a lot of them have other, the issues relative to childcare, no summer camp, et cetera. So I'd say over half our staff are very comfortable working from home. The work is getting done. The communication is happening. And so while we will probably be looking at a transition, maybe eventually by the end of the year, we'll all be back in the office. I'd say for the next 6 months, more than half of our staff will continue to work from home and be successful. Certainly the Zoom and Microsoft Teams and all these tools that are available and have really been refined really make that much more effective and possible to do that. Silver lining wise, actually I did get COVID in early April. Fortunately, I had a very mild case. Looking back at it now, it was a mild case. You never know where it's going to go. But I was out of commission for a couple of weeks, but again, we have a great management team. We have great project managers. So they just kept everything moving along. And again, my goal is eventually to, yes, step back a little bit and let people that want to move up in the firm, become involved and take over so that it will be a sustainable effort. So.
But yeah, these little trial runs, right? Whether because COVID, you don't know if that's a case that is a light one. Right?
Mm-hmm. Well, that's your vaccine, Scott.
Yes, indeed.
So, Linda, you were going to address that.
Yeah. Well, besides silver on the top, for the YWCA, we did not have the capacity across our organization to be remote. So it gave us some emergency funds to equip our staff to be able to do that. I mean, frankly, I had to go buy a laptop. I mean, I did not have the capacity. I'm an old desktop person, so they had to train me and our team. We've had to slowly get them the tools they needed because we were not equipped. Absolutely. Our money went into staff and not into technology, unfortunately. That was short-sighted, but now we're getting better. What I will tell you, though, is that we not only became a frontline domestic violence, childcare, housing, wellness, and health equity, but we are now a school support for tutoring, for remote learning for all of our populations. Not only do we do it, but we're supporting it because of the numbers of people that we serve who did not have access to that remote learning or the support to be able to do that. So our youth, our girls, our young women who are struggling with school, raising families, we've been able to help our childcare parents, our pregnant and parenting teens, our girls that are at risk, and our young people. But equally, as importantly, we are now a food distributor because we went to proactive outreach and check-in. Because we couldn't schedule appointments as readily as we did proactive outreach and check-in, we found out that our families didn't just need counseling, they needed food, they needed emergency supplies. So now we're very adept at connecting with, collecting our own food and distributing it, and connecting with Friendly House and the food banks to get our families to emergency food and supplies. We are now able to do remote learning and tutoring. And Scott, don't worry, the child care and youth community and camp community is reopening with a gazillion regulations and serving much fewer in the same space. But July 1, the YW is reopening our child care, our youth programs, and our summer camp with masks and social distancing and square foot, all of that. But our families need it. In fact, I mean, we're gonna go from serving 300 people a day to maybe 200 people a day, but we're gonna be able to relieve families and provide that. I mean, our kids, we used to worry about the summer slide. These kids have been out of school since March. So we are supporting a whole generation who have not had access or the supports they needed to be able to learn from home. So I don't even know what your question was, but the silver lining is some of this can continue, and we will continue it because it makes us more effective and efficient. But we still cannot lose that face-to-face connection with our staff, our volunteers, and our clients.
Got it. Got it. So here's a question sort of outside of the kind of current events, and it's more of a broader leadership question. And I know you've seen it on paper. So it says, over your career, tell us about one of the biggest challenges you faced, how you came through it, and what you took away from it in terms of lessons learned. Obviously, Karen, you just mentioned, your cancer is probably a big one of those. Anything else? Who wants to start with that one? Scott?
Well, again, I think that while I haven't, nothing jumped out at me, but again, as a co-founder and principal and, avid designer, architect, my challenge is really, and again, I had a big family. So the challenge is balancing work and family. So again, I've always been accused of working too much, but certainly, when you love what you do, it doesn't quite feel like work. So that's still an ongoing balance that I need to address. And certainly, obviously, it's easier to spend time with your grandkids than with your kids usually. But so anyway, that's something I'm still working on. And certainly, when I do transition to have more free time, then that will be a priority.
Got it. Anybody else sort of have a lesson?
Yeah, this is my hardest time. I don't know how you raised the last $2 million of a $7.5 million capital campaign that's part of a $24 million project by Zoom. And the last dollars are always the hardest to come in. So that's while trying to operate in construction. And thank God, I mean, we closed on our project, Peter, January 31st. I swear, if it had been a day later, we would have never been able to close. So we started construction in January, and because we're essential with housing and childcare, we were not part of that closing down of the construction projects across the state.
Right.
We were able to continue. Now it's been a little tricky with supply chain and all of that, but we expect to close within 2 weeks of our original date. And doing this racial justice work in a risky environment, you can't be face to face, but how do you do this work? Just by Zoom, you can't. And continuing to offer the services. I'm struggling, and I don't know how we come out, but I know the YWCA has been around for 135 years in Worcester. They'll live way past me, so I expect that they will do just fine on the other side of this.
Karen, anything you wanted to add to the lessons learned?
Well, I guess it would be the same thing as this is the toughest year. My cancer, I got through it almost, with very little problems other than I lost my hair. And now it's back. But in terms of this challenge, and I have not seen my husband because he was in isolation when he was sick. I had one window visit, but he was not well that night and that day. So I haven't seen him since the end of February. And so now that he's in hospice, it's an amazing process to go through. There are 8 different people on his team, and they check in with me regularly. They're taking care of him, and I will be able to be with him if and when he starts the transition. So this is definitely going to be the challenge of a lifetime. But we've been together 44 years. Been a great ride. Fabulous man, just as I know your husband is, Linda, but it's hard when it is your spouse. So yeah. I don't mean to get too, but it's close.
I used to have something on my refrigerator that says, you're going to get tests all the way through life, and you're going to keep getting them, and then you pass one, and then the next test comes along. It's just the way it goes. And those are some tough ones. So thinking about the future of your organization, Linda, you mentioned this is the toughest year. There was a Jack Nicholson movie where he was at the airport. There's some famous line, and he gets dragged back into something. He says, "Just moments from a clean getaway," was his line. And so here you are, you're kind of closing in on this, nice transitional kind of eventual retirement, and kaboom, this, as you referred to, double pandemic, kind of hits. So the good news is that, you and Karen and obviously Scott to some degree had the test of preparing a senior team, have a board, have an organization that's been thinking about that, even though it may not be imminent. So what has that process looked like inside your organization? And what's it been for you in terms of mentoring, and how has your organization thought about that?
Well, from the women of the YWCA board in 2015 released the strategic plan, which out of it came a racial justice agenda, a leadership continuity, because when they said succession planning, everybody said, "Oh, Linda's leaving," and this, which led to this capital campaign and renovation project. So They
said we better get that done while she's here, huh?
Yes. So we were flatter than we are now. It was me and all the direct reports. So over the last 5 years, they've made me have 2 senior senior associate execs, one on operations and one on program. And they helped me find the resources to hire a race and gender equity director, because that was on my plate as well. So now we have a team. Every single department or program area has done a succession plan, because as we have had maternity leaves or family interruptions, we definitely saw that it wasn't just my position. It wasn't just, you know, the number twos, it throughout the entire organization. And it gave our organization, after we found the resources over 5 years to do this, an opportunity to have a leadership track so that people saw a place to go in the organization. We could do much more grooming and coaching and mentoring, and we could move our stars up through the group. Now, see, we were always smart to do it at the board level. I mean, we have a president, a president-elect, and 2 vice presidents. So we basically have our leadership team at the board level for 6 to 10 years, but we didn't have that at the YWCA inside team level. Yeah. So that's been a huge opportunity for us to, you know, test and try and grow, and it's been everything in the world. So I could go home in March, and there are 2 team leaders who alternate days and other team leaders. So the organization is covered every day, but it doesn't have to be me as the face. And it's given me an opportunity. I love mentoring young people. So I do as much of my mentoring of the staff within as I have from without my whole life. I mean, how do you do this? I mean, that's like the favorite thing I do. So now we've had a chance to take that through the entire organization, both our board and our staff. And we have young women leadership programs. I mean, those young women come on our board. So it's definitely been our philosophy, but it's been much more intentional and focused over the last 5 years.
Got it. And so, Karen, your board sounds like they did something similar, because you've got kind of a new strategic plan. You're trying to change your funding sources, and this is all with sort of the little ... You know, you'll have a transition, you know, at some point. So how is your organization prepared?
Well, we started the conversation about, I'm going to say 3.5 years ago, in that time frame before I got sick. And we started really asking ourselves about the sustainability of our cap, because we're over 90% federal and state funded, which is a dangerous place to be. Ugh. And we've never been good at fundraising. We've, because we're so service directed, that we got lazy, you know, and I say we, the collective we, that, you know, in good times, the money flows when you're working in the right areas of federal money. And then we got hit with the sequester, and we lost a great deal of funds, direct funds, which required us to downsize the organization, rethink everything, and then also say, why are we aligned with this national brand that's called the RCAP if we're not maximizing the ability to move into the rural communities? We were just doing water and wastewater. Mm-hmm. So that began the dialogue there. It also brought in more dialogue about having more individuals represent the other states. Right now, my board is pretty dominant from the Worcester County area. And it was, so I use the word flipping. We're really flipping the organization upside down. And while I don't want anyone to ever misunderstand the messaging here, because we will always have our housing program be the most dominant, it is only in Worcester County. And yet we've got this much larger opportunity to work in rural development. So that is what drove it. And then, as I said, I got sick. So we were able to move the succession a little quicker. We did a lot, like what Linda said, created deputy directors under all of the directors, because I don't like having one person shows. You know, it's just so dangerous. And when you lose one person, or they're out even sick for 2 weeks, it's really tough to know where they stand in terms of program management, what your funders are looking for. We're accountable to so many different regulatory agencies. So where that took us now, I have been in conversation with my board. They have asked me to stay another 3-year period, of which will stabilize the resources, especially after this virus, because now it's a the new norm is what they're talking about. And so I am very happy. I think that personally, it'll be a good transition for me to stay busy. So, but it'll be over in 3 years. We're going to start. I mean, they'll start a search, and then I will hang up my shingle, and our cap will be fine. I mean, I really believe, like Linda, our organizations. You go through the peaks and valleys. There are so many nonprofits out there that really aren't advanced. And I say that with all due respect to everyone. And Linda's point about technology is a good one. The reason we got into this business was passion. And because we believe so vehemently in what we do. But the business community, appropriately so, has put much larger expectation onto our governance, onto our how we hold ourselves accountable for taxpayer dollars. So those that were paying attention to the shift that happened a number of years ago from output to outcomes are ahead of the game.
Yeah.
Yep.
We have to know how to count our widgets. We have to know how to talk the talk. And unfortunately, I think that the downside of some of this pandemic issues and all that is that more and more of the smaller nonprofits will need to align either together or align with bigger organizations so that they can keep the mission going, but the funding piece is really a problem.
It strikes me both you and Linda are running very large nonprofits, but there's a lot of entrepreneurial energy that you've brought to, this program diversification. And I think the difference between you and Scott is that you have this sort of board of directors, that you're reporting to, kind of helping prod and look at that long-term future. Scott, you're a business owner, and you don't have those same external, not really internal, right?
Yeah.
You don't have a board of directors kind of.
No, we have a management team. Yeah.
So, but in the end, it's the Hall of Fame, and we're really talking about legacy, right? And the legacy is making sure your organization is healthy beyond your, individually being the person at the helm. And right?
Yeah.
And so,
Absolutely.
get that 24 million done before Linda does something else. But how does that lens work in a private enterprise, Scott?
Well, again, we have a good management team that really each of them has kind of a responsibility for various aspects of the company. Not only, and again, most of them also are running projects. So the question, the transition then is, do they want to become owners, and how does that work? And then also, how are we attracting and motivating some of our younger staff? Some of the millennials. Are they going to be sticking around? Like we all know, millennials tend to work, for two or 3 years and move on to the next company. We actually have a pretty good track record of hiring and maintaining a lot of our younger staff for a longer period of time. So we're hopeful that some of them will express an interest in staying for the long term and potentially, again, becoming owners and managers of the firm. But again, we have a much smaller organization to deal with, and we have, our services are all in the design and construction support industry. So it's a little different program than obviously what Karen and Linda deal with.
Clearly, but I think, to me, and just kind of looking at some of the things you've talked about, being a mission-based organization, having that environmental priority that I know you take personally, but I'm sure is, felt throughout the firm, working like you do with nonprofits. You mentioned that 40 and 40. It sounded like a takeoff on our 40 under 40 event. The amount of work you're doing. If we talk about that younger generation, having those values in your organization and acting towards them are a really big part about people, wanting to, be part of that future. Not
Absolutely.
just a professional firm, but in what you stand for. So, here's the. I won't mention, no one, you're here because of your wisdom. The Hall of Fame doesn't infer that you're older. It just infers that you've worked for a long enough time period that you've got some wisdom. So you've shared a lot of it today. We're going to wrap up. There was that last question. Any last thought for our audience? You can give one or not. I think we've got a lot out of our conversation today. But are we good, folks?
We're
Any last-
good. Thank you, Peter.
That was a
This
wonderful
has been very
conversation.
nice. Thank
And
you.
I just want to say, prayers for the health and peace of everyone's family. And thank you all for sharing so much today. It's really
Well,
Thank you.
thank you, Peter, for having your paper talk about these issues.
Yes,
And,
really.
when you brought out the boardroom, women in the boardroom, and you've just brought a piece to the business community's efforts in this racial justice work. I mean, that's not everybody's doing that. So thank you.
No, that's really a great point.
And thank you all.
Thank you. We'll see you all
Okay.
next week,
Sounds
right?
good. Absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye now.
Bye, everybody. You take care.
Take care.